Glad you're here again for the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. And as we talk in this session of the Roundtable, we're going to be discussing the government's propositions in dealing with the economic setback this virus will have. If you've been listening, government is pouring it on big. The spigots are opening. The money will flow in. I've been hearing things such as $2,000 per person throughout the country. I've been hearing things over $1 trillion to be injected into this situation. So as we talk about the elements of the economy as it relates to politics, I just would like anybody to jump in and give your thoughts from the start.
Sure. I think that we've reached a maximum debt load, and this being a global crisis where there's a lot of countries that are cash strapped in dealing with this, and when we have to bail out whoever it is, the airline companies, private citizens, whatever, we're going to have a hard time borrowing money from any country in the world, and we can print it and we can put those numbers out there, but that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back on our currency and our economic system in the long run.
Yeah, I mean we have annual budget deficits running high now. We have 23 trillion and counting national debt. That's the number they give us, but that's not the long-term unfunded obligations. That number is even vastly higher than that. I mean, this is like TARP 2.0, or was it 3.0? Bush did something, Obama did something, and now we're getting it again. I mean, it happens because there's a crisis, and the politicians believe they have to do something. Mm-hmm. That's why it happens. And there's no regard for where we... I mean, even Mitch McConnell was telling his caucus, just, you know, you may not like it, but just vote for it anyway. And that was the coronavirus response bill that they're now talking about. This is not the billions and trillions that are coming up next.
Yeah, it's the same old, meaning we saw this go around in 2008, and here we see it again. And nobody can say that Trump is conservative when it comes to budgeting.
No.
Nobody can say that's true for the Republican Senate.
No.
Basically, the Republican Senate is doing what the Democrat House of Representatives is doing.
Yes.
And I feel like we're edging up to some pretty precarious territory here, a cliff that we could go over.
Yeah. I mean, when the rubber hits the road, there might need to be some spending on the government side to get through this, but you got to start thinking about now, what are we going to cut on the back end? If I were in charge, I would shut down every single Middle East base and bring every single piece of personnel and military equipment home tomorrow. And that saves a bunch of money.
Not just that, I would shutter at least 5 federal agencies.
Yeah.
Sure.
You've got energy, you've got education, there's all labor, there's all kinds of federal agencies that either official cabinet positions and or agencies that you could just shutter and send the message to the American people, we're going to take the hit too.
Yep.
But they never think that way.
Right. Their jobs come first, it seems like.
Yes.
And we're digging ourselves a bigger hole as we continue these kinds of policies. And I also heard, and I'm not sure exactly how they're run, but banks, I suppose, supposedly are required to keep 10% on reserve. Right now, that's being totally undercut.
Right.
They're removing it so that there's just no precautions, no protections. And I think we're sailing into very dangerous waters here with this kind of fiscal policy.
Yeah, I mean, some people are invoking the Great Depression, depending who you read and who you listen to. You know, there's all kinds of rhetoric right now that kind of makes you stop and wonder, wow. I mean, it's kind of jaw-dropping and kind of makes you wonder, is this generation really have the stuff to deal with this?
Well, the federal government has set the example for society for the last 50 years and run on a deficit. When you have good economists and good financial planners will tell you, for your personal finances, have at least 3, ideally 6 months worth of income in the bank. Basically what you make now, 3 months worth of that. Well, how long's it been since our government ran on that principle?
Yeah.
I mean, Murphy's Law, right? Something will inevitably go wrong at the worst possible time. And to not have some sort of rainy day fund, which, I mean, it's not as common as it should be in society, but, you know, most homes that are financially stable have that. But our government lost all track of that, and it's like a bunch of teenagers with a credit card with no
No self-control at all.
no.
Yeah, I appreciate the suggestions you guys made with respect to budgeting, meaning pulling out of the Mideast with all the military equipment personnel that's there, as well as removing all those bureaucracies.
Yes.
Think about how many medical professionals we have in the Middle East right now
Right.
is field
Yeah.
surgeons. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to need,
Good point.
we might need those people.
Yeah, yeah. But do the American people have the stomach for it?
Big question.
That's a huge question.
That's like the
Yeah.
$64,000 question right now.
Yeah. No, I think people are all excited about the $2,000 they're going to get.
Well,
And when, you know, people think about that, that gets them excited. Are they thinking about the repercussions? And for me, I've just been struggling with, what do I do with that money? Because I feel I should not be receiving that. Why? Because I've had my job.
Yep.
I haven't lost my job.
yeah.
I can understand for a wage earner
Right.
who's in a business that was forced to shut down,
Yeah.
or for businesses that were required by the government to be closed down, I can see a reimbursement package. But to give $2,000 to everybody,
No.
that's crazy.
I'm going to give it right to my right to my kids. I'll probably put it in a gold stock, but I'll put it in their name.
Yeah, and Gary, I appreciate the reason behind why you were going to do that. Why?
It's probably their money that's getting taken anyway. That's who the debt's going to fall on. It's going to be a drop in the bucket of this giant deficit that we have, but it's going to be the young kids that are going to burden that probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like it's so unfair to this next generation with respect to the kind of printing of money and the debt we're placing on them.
Well, here's a moral question that I think it's time for the church to start discussing. Yeah, there's a lot of moral questions we bring up. You know, the sanctity of marriage, abortion, all kinds of, and they're important. Make no doubt about it. When are we going to have a conversation as in the church, compelling our public officials to stop stealing from future generations? I mean, this goes to the Ten Commandments.
Well,
I agree.
I think it's Romans 12 that a lot of people will cite to me as a libertarian when it talks about obedience to authority and obedience to government. But if you read forward, I think it's even the next chapter, it might be 13, where it talks about not going into debt or not. There's a good discussion of the dangers of debt in one of the following chapters after the obedience to authority and obedience to government.
I've never put that together.
I
Meaning
haven't
Romans
either.
13.
Yeah.
I think it's
No,
13.
you're right. That's where it's government, and you see not too much longer later that passage. Let no debt remain outstanding,
That's
except
exactly
the
the
continuing debt to love one another.
Right.
I never connected the two.
Yeah. I mean, we are stealing from my kids. Whoever has Generation Z in their house, the politicians in D.C., and probably even your state capital are stealing from them. And when are we going to have the moral discussion on that going on with our public officials?
I think that's a great discussion to have, and I never thought about that before either. Because we think about the sanctity of human life,
Right.
the sanctity of marriage. I was trying to think, how do you coin a phrase in talking about this as a moral issue?
We have one in the libertarian community. It's kind of gotten to be like a punchline because it's so cliched. It's taxation is theft. But when you really sit down and reflect on it, the government cannot give anything to anyone without taking it away
From someone
else.
That's exactly right.
That's just the simple fact
exactly right.
of how government entitlement works. And sure, we can have a discussion about, the social contract with government as a citizen of the state, and that we, that we basically give them permission to do that in a sense for certain things. But I think that list of certain things that was originally in our Constitution very small has grown enormously to the point that there are things that most people would not agree with if they knew what they were contributing to. I mean, take Planned Parenthood, for example. They are federally funded. I mean, that's one example of the endless foreign wars that we've gotten ourselves in is another example. But yeah, we need to have that discussion.
Yeah, and how to have it within the church. I think that's a great question.
I don't know how we start having it. All I know is it needs to be had. And frankly, it needs to be an adult conversation, and a biblical conversation, and a civil conversation. It can't become a, well, oh, you're against Trump, and
I know.
and it becomes an us versus them within the body of Christ. It shouldn't dissolve into that kind of territory.
Because I know you'll have those in the church who will say, well, we've got to make sure we have government taking care of the poor, continuing these welfare policies. And that will be a roadblock into talking about the issue of debt that will be put on the next generation.
I mean, me as a Christian, I'm I'll say insulted, for lack of a better word, that government has become the mainstream source of charity in the world, in the country, where it's not. That was never government's role, especially in America.
Right.
That's the church's role.
Yep.
That's other organizations, voluntary charity. I mean, the forced charity that's handed out by government is not charity at all, because it's at the point of a gun. If you don't pay your taxes, eventually someone will show up at your house with a gun to put you in a cage.
Right.
And if you don't comply, they'll fill you full of lead.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like we have even Christians who would say, but that's compassion. And I feel like that's phony compassion.
It is. It's forced compassion.
Yeah. And how can compassion be forced?
Exactly. It's a complete redefinition of the word compassion.
Isn't it interesting how we redefine words?
Oh, yeah.
Redefining marriage, redefining compassion.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and then we'll have those others who will say, well, we're a Christian nation. If we're a Christian nation, that means we have to make sure the poor are taken care of by the government.
Well, I think you can just shoot that down with separation of church and state, right?
In what way?
Well, sure, we are a Christian nation, but our government is supposed to be separate from any sort of theology. So to say that being a Christian nation justifies our money as Christians going to the government to hand out it's charity versus us giving it voluntarily, I think is just a non sequitur.
Yeah,
that's a very good point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That is a good point. That is a good point.
Yeah. So you see the repercussions of this whole coronavirus coming into play that will have economic implications far on down the road, and how that plays into our lives as believers in the secular world. Just by way of wrap up, anybody like to give any other comments to this?
I guess what I would say and at least in relation to the coronavirus and the cost and things that are related to that, it's just that our government needs to be doing a better job of long-term planning. There's no reason this crisis should have come to this point. If they had simply been doing their job of the legislature holding the executive accountable. They do that, and we aren't caught surprised when some pandemic spreads across the world.
Garrett, anything?
I just hope we can get through it in a timely fashion to where the damage that I'm afraid is being done to our economy, and not only that, but our social structure and our psyche goes too far. I mean, it's scary that, like we talked about in one of our previous episodes, that never let a crisis go to waste, and these government officials are not letting it go to waste. And I think the challenge is going to be reeling that power back away from them when it's over.
Oh, before we conclude, what grade would you give the media?
Can you go F minus?
I guess. Okay.
Yeah, in general, I would say, and there's some good sources out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to dig for them, but if you just turn on and flip through 2, 4, and 7, yeah, definitely an F minus minus.
Yeah, and why does even Fox News continually have to put up pandemic virus? So, I mean, that's a source I like. I like One American News. I think they're good. But again, they're a channel that isn't all that popular. But yeah, it's very frustrating watching the media. But maybe I'll end up on a joke this time because we didn't give a quote. What do you do if you're a redneck and you run out of toilet paper? What do you use? You know what they use? Duct tape. No. Well, with that, we're going to end up today's edition of the Sophie Scholl Society.